Hello and welcome to this additional lesson on the first level permission system within the Office 365 account, in which we will look at how roles are assigned. That is, what the criteria are for assigning administrative roles before proceeding with their assignment. We open this slide, or as we saw in the introductory lesson, we will address this topic in 3 points. Firstly, Microsoft's suggestion to assign a minimum of 2 to a maximum of 4 global administrators, depending on the size of the company. Secondly, assign administrative roles only for what is strictly necessary and useful to the operational needs within the company. Thirdly, configure multi-factor authentication, at least for those who have administrative roles. It would be ideal to do this for everyone, but at least for those who have administrative roles. Thirdly, administrative roles must have multi-factor authentication for security reasons. Because once they access, they can be assigned to the company. They can do everything. Next, we open the first point, and here, as you can see, I took a screenshot, obviously, so you can always refer to it in the slides. But now we will also go to Office 365 and do this step dynamically. I went to highlight that this user Allison has no administrative role. And we click on Manage Roles, and I went to assign this role. So I am here on my Microsoft 365 account. I click on Edison Clark's name. As you can see, he has no access to administration. Manage Roles. And I will first click on what I want to do so that this user has access to the administration interface. And then choose which administrative role to assign to this user. Next, the global administrator saves the changes. At this point, Allison Clark is a global administrator. Microsoft suggests not granting these powers to more than 2 or 4 people based on the size of the company. Why? Because the people who have these powers have total access to the organization. They have almost unlimited access to configurations, to data. It is not access like that of the administrator who has the power to do everything, but it is almost unlimited. It is. Therefore, these are people with considerable powers. And it is good to limit who has these considerable powers within the account. Anyway, beyond the fact that these powers should be limited as much as possible, it is necessary to have at least one global administrator and one authentication administrator. Also, to ensure that in some cases, all tasks to be performed do not rely solely on the main administrator. Because, for example, the administrator grants the powers of a global administrator and an authentication administrator. It is good to have at least one of each, a global administrator and an authentication administrator. Because, for example, if the global administrator inadvertently blocks the account and requires a password reset, it is an activity that, by virtue of the powers conferred upon them, can also perform the authentication administrator without all the work falling on the general account administrator. So let's go back. We will look at the useful roles for carrying out operational activities. Therefore, the second point is to assign roles to strictly necessary individuals for what they need to work. For example, here I have given examples of commercial operators to whom it is not necessary to assign the role of global administrator, obviously for operational reasons. For example, to the one who performs the function of management control, who will therefore also need to see all expenses related to Office 365 licenses. It is not necessary to assign him the global administrator role. It is sufficient to assign him the license administrator role. Similarly, it is not necessary to assign the global administrator role, but the Teams and SharePoint administrator role will be sufficient, which are obviously individual roles. For the one who is responsible for a marketing campaign, who will have to manage the SharePoint site, it is the team with which to carry out the new campaign. For a business sector manager, for example, accounting or human resources management, which will manage the corresponding SharePoint site and the corresponding team in Teams. For the purchasing manager, who will manage the company's SharePoint site dedicated to purchasing. The dedicated purchasing team, where all suppliers will be included within the team, with whom it will discuss, organize video conferences, and exchange files. It is absolutely not necessary to assign the global administrator role to these three subjects. Therefore, this must absolutely not be done. Third point, multi-factor authentication. Here, I've put the link to the slide that we have already seen in the section dedicated to administration in the strict sense. Multi-factor authentication is absolutely necessary, at least for those who have administrative roles. How is that possible? We have already mentioned it. We will review it quickly. I download the Microsoft Authenticator app on my smartphone. And when I authenticate on my Office 365 account, in addition to asking me to enter the username, that is the administrator, the email address, and the password, it will also ask me to enter in the Authenticator app. On my smartphone, the number that I see on the computer, it is a more complicated step, a two-factor authentication, because it obviously implies that since I have configured this phone number, where the message arrives in the Authenticator app, it must be my phone. I must have it on my account. Therefore, this implies a level of security, a very, very high level of security. Let's say we have covered all the topics related to this lesson, and therefore I await you in the next lesson.